Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm your host, Jeff Jarman, and welcome to the Edge of the Earth. Today I am joined for a very special episode with my first ever official guest on this show, John. He is going to be joining us to talk about some ghostly adventures. We're going to cover all things that go bump in the night, everything that's scary. John, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me on there.
Do you want to give out your Twitter handle real quick and also kind of tell everyone what you're going to be up to in the near future?
Yes, my Twitter handle is at JGuitarRock, just the way it sounds, JGuitarRock. Follow me on there. I'm actually working on an upcoming podcast called The Fright Corner. I'm going to be doing horror movies in general. Be mostly centered around horror movies, but there's all kinds of other subjects. We got books, games, novels, just everything you can imagine. And I'm also working on a YouTube channel to do other movie reviews and entertainment reviews and dig into the big Star Wars hype that's hit so big right now. Just fan theories and everything. Just kind of going over a little bit of everything.
Awesome. And so let's jump right into it here, what we're going to talk about tonight. I think first we'll just cover off the basic notion of ghosts and the two different types of hauntings that we have. Could you explain those to us real quick?
Yeah, the first kind you have is a residual haunting, and that stuff, like you'll hear, it's almost like an imprint on our plane of existence, I guess you could call it. Like if you hear footsteps at a certain time at night, that's a residual haunting. You're going to hear it on that time, every time, all the time. An intelligent haunting is something that can reach out more and maybe try to communicate. It might move a few things, possibly. That goes into the realm of poltergeist and everything else. The other type we could have is a demonic haunting, which is probably the worst kind you could get. That's very violent, very physical. It really feeds off emotions of people, too. That's another thing to look at there. And, of course, we have other spirits such as shadow people, as I mentioned before, poltergeist.
Yeah,
that's pretty well the basic ones anyway.
So basically, you have the residual that, like you said, is the footsteps, or like the woman in the red dress walking down the stairs at 9 o'clock every night, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then you have the active ones where, you can knock twice on a wall and they'll knock back, 3 times or whatever. And so then you, like you mentioned, the demonic and the poltergeist. But with those first two, those are typically thought to be dead human spirits, right?
Yeah, that's the most typical thought, is whatever a spirit is or energy that's left behind. That's mostly what they think of.
And as far as I'm concerned, they're on the weaker side of the spectrum. They can't do a whole lot without taking energy, sucking energy from batteries or just camcorders, things like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, they feed off.
We see that quite a bit, actually.
Right. Yeah, they feed off that electromagnetic energy, which is basically what we theorize that they're made out of. And then, if you could a little bit explain the poltergeist side of things.
Okay. Well, the poltergeist side of it, which poltergeist is kind of interesting. It comes from old German word, polter meaning noisy and geist meaning ghost. So it pretty well means noisy ghost. They'll often move stuff. They'll throw plates down, they'll open doors, shut doors, move tables, chairs will move. You'll hear all kinds of stuff in the night. Usually they don't manifest through a physical sense that you'll actually see, but it's just more of the actions that it takes. Like I said, there's been cases where, cabinet doors opening and just slamming shut. There's a lot of that happens with poltergeist movement. Doors opening and shutting are a big one for them. And that's mostly what the poltergeist does. They're just real noisy and aggressive spirits that may not necessarily harm you, but they try to get your attention the best they can. And most of the time when people see these poltergeist hauntings is usually when hormones are at a very escalated time in people's lives. Sometimes it goes through puberty with boys and girls and stuff as they hit that age, because it's feeding off those hormones and emotions that you have. They're heightened.
And is the common theory that poltergeists were human at one point, or no?
Yes and no. Some of them seem to think that they could be, and some of them think it's just something that could be completely different. It could have something to do with where you are on the ground yourself. It could be because of seismic activity, could have part to do with the poltergeist activity that come through the what they call it, electromagnetic pulses and stuff. I mean, it could be a variety of. The most common thing is they think they are spirits, and it's more than usually just one spirit that accompanies a poltergeist.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've even heard a few theories about people who are psychokinetic, where they can move objects with their minds and stuff, and they could be causing the poltergeist haunting without even realizing it, like them doing it themselves, just because they're stressed out, or like you said, the hormones are raging and that kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. That can be a big part of it. Is your mind can play more tricks on you than anything. You know, if somebody does have that ability, they could be causing it subconsciously and not even know it while they're sleeping. It could be at a height of, like I said, an emotion. You know, maybe something made them real angry, or anything like that can happen.
And since we're talking about the poltergeist right now, and you mentioned the cabinets opening, let's cover your experience personally. Go over that real quick for us and explain, was there a lot of emotional issues going on at that time, or was everything cool and it was just a really weird deal?
Well, in all honesty, I think it was a really weird deal. We were at a pretty good point in our lives. We were doing pretty good, and I think it was just where we were living at, even though it was a new place, a new apartment that we were living in. But I think that there was something. We lived next to a busy highway. I think that may have something to do with it, but there was one night, my wife would happen to be at work. I was sitting on the couch watching TV. The kitchen's behind me. And, I mean, it just, all of a sudden just heard something slam, and I turned around, and you could see the cabinet door still moving where it slammed so hard. I mean, I jumped up. I thought there was somebody in the home. I didn't know what to expect. That was probably one of the biggest things that happened. That's the most experience that I have there, other than having the sleep paralysis the one night. But that would be definitely the most movement there was that. I mean, you get an uneasy feeling. You might feel a little bit of cold spot here and there, but the cabinets opening and shutting like that one night was to top it off, mostly.
Yeah, that would definitely get my attention. So let's go ahead and move on to the other category we mentioned, the so-called demonic type hauntings, or sometimes they're called obsessions, not necessarily possessions yet to that extent, but they start out with an obsession where the people are terrorized in their homes, or, slowly broken down over time to become more willing to this so-called possession type state. So when I say demonic, or when I think of demonic, I don't necessarily think of the demons of the Bible, just because, I mean, that's a whole other episode, but I think of just a malevolent entity that never was human and is a lot more powerful than a ghost. John, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I completely agree with you on that, because like I said, the Bible issue is just a whole different subject on another episode, but to me, it's, you can call it demonic, malevolent, whatever. It's the same kind of thing. It's something that's going to terrorize the home and get you emotionally disturbed. I mean, that's what it wants. It wants to feed off your emotions of fear. Fear is the biggest thing it can have on you. And whether it's a demon or just a malevolent presence that's in the home, it will do what it can. It's liable to reach out and actually harm you at one point.
And these are often associated with Ouija boards, correct?
Yeah, there is some talk about that. I mean, that's still an up-in-the-air debate. People swear by Ouija boards, never touch them, never have anything to do with them. And some people say it's just a gimmick.
Yeah.
I've not had any experiences with them. I have messed with one back when I was in high school. Nothing ever happened, so I don't know what to say about them. I know my personal experience, I never had any issues with them.
Yeah, I've yet to ever try it. I'm almost curious at this point, but some would say those are famous last words, Anyway, so we've covered all the basics so far. So now let's go back. You and I have done some ghost hunting together in the past. We had one case that was fairly interesting. It was a house that was supposedly haunted. This couple had contacted us to come out and try and figure out what was there and maybe even cleanse the place if we could. So we went out and did a couple investigations. We had some activity. John, why don't you expand a little bit on what we saw at the house and kind of what we felt on the whole was actually happening there?
Well, I had the experience. See, I kind of went in there hyped up, hoping to see something. I think that was kind of my mistake. And for the most part, we did have one little audio thing that kind of sounded like maybe there was footsteps or not. I really couldn't tell. I had an uneasy feeling because I was just ready to see something, but I think what we could determine is when they talked about seeing stuff upstairs, when we actually investigated the upstairs, if you remember when we were looking around, there was a lot of black mold growing in that home. And that can have an effect on people and what they see and how they feel. It can have a huge factor on you. It can make you real sick on top of everything else.
Yeah, not to mention it was an old house, and when you have walls that aren't quite as insulated at that point in the house's life, the electromagnetic radiation kind of leak out, and it can actually cause mild hallucinations or kind of an altered mind state that could make you think you're seeing things.
Oh yeah, and that's actually one thing we did find when we were using the EMF detectors. We found that there was a few areas that were real high in intensity on the EMF fields, and that can have an effect on people. And I think there were some other personal issues going on there at the time that they had mentioned to us that leads me to believe that I don't necessarily think the place was haunted. My opinion alone. I mean, that's just what I kind of came up to whenever I see there's black mold growing here. You got some bad faulty wiring. It's an old home. You can hear a car going down the freeway miles away to make you think like something's right there in the room with you. I mean, it was pretty obvious. Old home, like you said, the stairs were creaky. That can explain a lot of stuff going up and down the stairs.
Yeah,
I mean, as far as I could tell, I couldn't find anything myself. But
yeah, there was also drug use at one point in the house that could have affected things as well. The wife had claimed that she had been pushed down the stairs that you mentioned before, and then the husband had supposedly even been picked up and twirled around. So it was kind of it was an extreme haunting to be walking into based on what they were saying. And when I interviewed them, it seemed pretty clear they believed what they were saying. Like, they seemed very genuine about it. And when we did the investigation and didn't find a whole lot, it was a bit discouraging, and it makes you question whether or not the house was actually haunted. But like you said, we captured possibly footsteps, and then at one point when I was outside talking with the husband, we were both kind of looking up at the second floor window, and we thought that we saw a shadow pass kind of in front of the window because I had a camera or a camcorder going up there, and it had a light on it. And when it almost looked like something walked in front of the light to dim it just for half a second. So, I mean, it was kind of a tough call. I didn't catch anything on the camera itself, but basically the best audio we have was the footsteps. Let's go back to the poltergeist activity. Now, we all know the famous poltergeist movie. They originally made the first one. They made this recent remake. Were those the only two films made, John?
Well, of course, they had two other poltergeists. They had the original Poltergeist from the 80s, directed by Steven Spielberg, and can't remember the other guy's name. He done Texas Chainsaw Massacre and a few others. But they done a 2 and 3, but there was always rumors that the set of that movie was cursed. I mean, even the actors in it were scared of it. There was what happened was there's a famous pool scene where she's out in the pool is getting dug and all the bodies come up. Well, it was cheaper for them to buy real skeletons than it was to make the props. And they felt that had something to do with the place being, the set being cursed. They always felt uneasy there. They actually at some point wouldn't film until they came in and had a preacher bless the place before they would continue. And after filming, the girl that played the oldest daughter in the movie, her boyfriend actually beat her to death and killed her. And so that led on to where they did 2. 2, there was an old man that played the old preacher. He actually wound up with stomach cancer and died shortly after production. And then the third movie, the little girl, Heather Rourke, I believe, or O'Rourke, I think that was her name. She had a Crohn's disease, and she actually died shortly after. I think actually during the production of 3, she had died from complications of surgery. So there was always this rumor that there was a curse because of them using real skeletons on the set instead of using props.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. Those movies, they didn't really stick to strictly poltergeist activity. I think they just used the name and everything,
Oh, no.
But, creative license and all that. But still, that was a very prominent pop culture interpretation of a poltergeist type haunting. Like we said earlier, normally poltergeists are just moving objects around, throwing, sometimes violent but usually not, and it's kind of tricky on how you get rid of those exactly, because they're more powerful than regular ghosts, but they don't possess you. But they're also, you know, they're hard to nail down on what exactly they are, so you don't know how to get rid of them other than telling them, you know, please go.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there was even a movie based on a true story shortly. I don't know if it was before or after Poltergeist came out. It was called The Entity, and it was based on this woman that was being terrorized by this ghost or poltergeist. I'm not exactly sure what to call it, whether it's demonic or not. I don't know. But she was actually being sexually assaulted by this ghost, supposedly. And she claimed it for a long time. I don't know if they ever really proved it or didn't prove it.
Yeah, sometimes it's really tough. A lot of people, they're actually embarrassed or ashamed to admit something like that. And so a lot of times it goes unnoticed and it isn't taken seriously. Those few that do come out and say that they've been, you know, sexually assaulted by something like this, they have to be handled delicately. They can't just be told, oh, you're imagining things, or, you know, here's some pills and get over it.
Well, and absolutely. I mean, you can't. It's a delicate situation because maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. It could have been something mentally that was affecting her that where she thought that. Or maybe she was. I mean, they never really got conclusive evidence one way or the other about it. So yeah, they really don't know what to say on that.
Yeah, it's almost like the Amityville horror case. I used to think that one was totally legitimate and everything was true, but then the most recent information that just came out within the past year or so, I'm pretty convinced that that was a giant hoax. And if you look at the Amityville horror, that was, I mean, it was exactly what it says in the title. It was horrifying. It also had the pop culture thing with several movies being made after it. But based on, you know, all the different accounts and the lawsuits and the lawyer and all that being involved, it was made up by three guys over a bottle of wine one night. And
yeah, it was actually made up by George and Kathy Lutz and a lawyer, because the rumor was that his construction company was going under. He couldn't afford the place. There had been a real murder there. There was the Defoe murders, and that was true. But they're pretty sure the son did it. He wasn't possessed or nothing. He owed a lot of money to people. He was on drugs at the time, and he's changed his story so many times nobody can even take him literally anymore.
Yeah.
But I think they fed off that, because at one time he did say, well, voices told me to do it. Well, then George and Kathy Lutz contact this author and lawyer. They all sit down. They come up with this great story to write down the book and everything, and come up with this to get out from underneath their debt. And it worked out real well for them because they got popular and they made lots of money off of it. And even their kids, some of their kids have come out and said that it was just a big hoax, but they were told not to say nothing about it.
Yeah.
Now there's one, the youngest boy does try to say that's real, but he was maybe 4 or 5 at the time, and there's no telling what was embedded into his head at the time, too, by his parents.
That's very true. So, not to end on a sour note of a hoax, but there are a lot of very, very real, very true cases. If you think about how there have been literally, like, I don't know if you could say millions, but I'm going to say millions of witnesses or people who have heard stories or something involving a ghost. I mean, if you have that many witnesses, that would win any court case in the world. I mean, it's very widespread. It's through every culture, every race, every location on the planet. I mean, they all have stories of this sort of thing, and I don't think there's any greater question out there than what happens after you die. And if we're going to find the answer to that question, it's going to be from the paranormal or from ghosts. And that's why I do what I do, and that's why, John, you are interested in this as well, correct?
Yes, very interested in it, because I'd like to know. I want to know as many true things as I can. I have different personal beliefs, personal thoughts on it. There's some things I can't explain, but I want to research it and find out what it is. I'm not ready to say that it's absolutely this, because I need to know, is this what it is, or is it this? I mean, I don't know if I'm making sense or not, but I want to know what's true and what's not true.
Yeah, I totally agree. And everyone, we're going to continue to do this, and we're going to continue this discussion at a later time. John, thank you so much for being on the podcast and being our first guest ever, and we'd love to have you back very soon.
Oh, love to be back. No problem.
All right. You can find him at JGuitarRock on Twitter. You can find me at JeffJarman55 on Twitter. Also find my or this podcast on Twitter, at EOTE Podcast. Edge of the Earth Podcast, but EOTE Podcast. Yeah, Edge of the Earth was taken. Sorry. Also, you can find us, jeffjarman.tk or edgeoftheearth.tk. Either way, we're on iTunes as well now, finally. So we're there, and on Spreaker. Follow, subscribe, anything you can do to help the podcast, greatly appreciated. And we will see you next time right here at the Edge of the Earth.